Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this workshop on oral communication skills.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to have you all here. Today we'll be discussing presentation skills. I'm glad you could make the time to attend the session. I know that your exams are drawing close. Right. I hope you are able to see my screen and that you are able to hear me speak.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Right. So at some point or the other, all of us will have to make a presentation. This is inevitable. Even though we're not people who are, inherently fond of making presentations, we will have to make a presentation either as a part of our job or as a part of our studies. This session is just trying to acquaint you with the basics of what must go into a presentation. This is so that you are sufficiently informed and ready for the time when you will be asked to make presentations when it's time for your placements. Okay? Any
Okay, ma'am.
good presentation will have three basic elements. These three elements are the message or the story, the slides or the visuals, and the delivery. So there are three things which make up any presentation: the message or the story, the visual element, the slides or the visuals, and then what you say, how you communicate it, your own delivery, your oral delivery. The first step when you are trying to make a presentation is to get your story right. This is the part where you prepare your script. In order to prepare your script, you will have to do a great deal of research. At some point, you will have to put down all the information that you have gathered through your research down onto either a document or onto paper, right? When you dump all of this unassorted information somewhere, that's called a brain dump. You can also brainstorm with others. You can ask others, consult others, get their opinions or their views. So essentially, this is the process by which you come to craft your script. You think through your topic, do some research, do some brainstorming with others, and dump all of this information down onto a document, let's say. After that, you'll make a mental picture of how you are going to go about your presentation. This mental picture is your mind map. Okay? Now that you have all of this content, you're trying to ask yourself, what is it that I'm trying to communicate here? What is my core message? At the end of this presentation, what exactly do I want my audience to understand? If, for example, I am asking myself this question, at the end of this, what exactly do I want my students to take away from this presentation? The answer would be, I want them to be able to know all the elements that should go into their own presentations. It's a very simple answer. At the end of this, I want you to be able to make your own presentations. So all the things that I put into my slides should equip you to make your own presentation. Now that you have that information clear and ready, you can make an outline of your presentation. What does an outline consist of? You'll have an introduction, a body, and a conclusion, just like any other outlines. But at this point, you're just trying to figure out how are you going to open your presentation. Visually speaking, what goes into your title slide? Orally speaking, how am I going to introduce my topic to my audience? Then we proceed to the body of the presentation. What are the key things that you are trying to inform your audience? And finally, the conclusion. A conclusion can also be a summing up of sorts. This is where you do not add any new points, but you quickly run through all the things that you've already covered in the presentation. Now that you have the outline ready, you'll proceed to make your rough draft. Your rough draft is going to give you some amount of direction in terms of how you are going to present. There will be a lot of unnecessary elements in every rough draft, which means you will have to edit this draft after you've made your draft. How do you edit your rough draft? How do you understand what is not necessary and what is necessary? When you're trying to edit your draft, you can keep this pointer in your mind. Critical, essential, and desirable. Some information will be critical to all presentations. The title of your presentation, any subtitles that you have, your key points, all of those are critical elements of a presentation. Then there are essential elements. Right now, for instance, I could have just put 2 bulleted points on this slide. But I feel like my point would be communicated a lot more lucidly if I were to add a few extra points, few subsidiary points. These subsidiary points are not critical points, rather they are essential points. They're necessary. Without them, I'll be able to make a presentation, but to make an effective presentation, they are necessary or essential. Then there are some desirable information. For example, now I am giving you a lot of examples. None of those examples are written in the slide. I am presenting these things to you orally. Not because they are critical elements, not because they are essential elements, but because they are desirable elements in this presentation. You will be able to understand me better if I give you a couple of examples. Those kind of points are called desirable points. Once you're done editing your draft should have all the critical information, all the essential information, and at least some amount of desirable information. Because this desirable information is what draws your audience's attention to your presentation. Remember that when we are making a classroom presentation or a business presentation, we should keep our content minimal. We can't have an extremely long presentation because then nobody will pay attention. We will always have a time limit imposed on us, so we should respect that time limit. If you're trying to make a 10 to 15 minute presentation, something like 1200 to 1800 words should be sufficient in your written draft. Okay? Now, any clarifications? Anything that you did not understand so far? Any critical points that I missed out on? Any essential points that I missed out on? Any desirable points that you would like me to add? I'm assuming that everybody was able to understand. Now we're going on into the strategies that we can use when we are trying to outline or draft our presentation. When we say draft, remember that this is both the draft for our slides as well as the draft for our oral presentation. So we're actually talking about the outline of the slides as well as the draft of our oral presentation. Depending on the nature of our topic, there are different strategies that we can use in order to order the content that we have prepared. Remember that these are not rules. These are just some tricks that we use, some formulae that we use, just to bring some order into this rather haphazard form of content that we might have amassed as a result of our research. We're just trying to structure things for ourselves. If we have a debatable topic, for instance, a debatable topic is the kind of topic which does not have a clear black and white answer. Instead, every person will have his or her own opinion on that topic. So they are trying to simply present their views on the topic. If you have a debatable topic to present, then you can use the PREP method. PREP is an acronym: position, reason, example, position. Essentially, you state your own claim or your position on the topic. Then you go on to give reasons as to why you take that specific position. Then you give a couple of examples to back up your claims. And then you conclude not by adding any new information, but by simply restating your position. Once again, you remind your audience that this is your view on this topic. It's a very simple strategy, but it's also very, very effective, especially when we have a debatable topic and when we are under a time crunch, when we don't have a great deal of time to do our research or to prep our slides. The PREP method can be very useful. What does PREP method stand for? Can somebody help me out? PREP stands for?
Position, reason, example, and position.
Yes, very good, Pratik. Thank you very much. Position, reason, example, and position. Essentially, you state your own stand on a topic. You give your reasons as to why you are taking this specific standpoint. Give a couple of examples that justify your standpoint, and then you go on to restate your viewpoint so as to conclude. Okay, if somebody has their mic turned on, and if that somebody is not trying to speak, may I please request them to turn off their mics? Right. Thank you very much. Now we have covered one strategy. This is a strategy that is ideal for debatable topics. Let's say we have another kind of a topic entirely, where you have a lot of information to present, just a lot of content. And this content is in some kind of chronological order. You're giving the history of an enterprise, let's say, or of an industry. You are going through a lot of information in chronological order, and then you are trying to make a prediction on the basis of all the information that you currently have. So this is a very information heavy topic, content heavy topic. If this is the kind of topic that you have, then you can use the past, present, future method. Past information begins the chronology. You proceed into the present information, and then you go on into what can be expected in the future. You're making predictions about what can be expected in the future. And you're making this prediction on the basis of past information as well as present information. Wherever you need to make a chronological sequence, the past, present, future method will be your best ally. This is also a method that is of great use to people who study data science. Why do I say that? Because a huge part of your job is to be predictive. You are trying to make predictions on the basis of available data. Since that is the case, you can rely on this method depending on the kind of topic that you are dealing with. Is that clear to everybody?
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for your responses. Now let's look at another kind of strategy which is best suited for another kind of topic. Let's say you're making a business presentation or a policy presentation where the issue is that there is some kind of a problem, some kind of a bottleneck. All of these are words that we use in business presentations. A bottleneck or a pain point. Essentially, you're just trying to pinpoint where there is a problem. So there is some sort of a problem that this business is facing. You need to figure out the causes behind that problem and then suggest a solution. Therefore, the strategy that we use in such contexts is the problem cause solution strategy. You are trying to pinpoint the problem, identify its causes, and then suggest a solution. Once again, this is something that will be of great use to people who study data science. You're specifically trying to identify what is the reason this business is not making sales. Why does this business have such a huge churn ratio, let's say? How do we correct that? You're trying to identify the problem, figure out the causes, and then suggest a solution. Now, why do we also include policy under this topic? Because when you're trying to make policies, when a business, when an enterprise, or when the government is trying to make a policy decision, they go about it through this exact same strategy. Identify the problem, seek out the causes, and find a solution. So the policy decision that they're making should ideally be able to solve the problem. In business presentations or policy presentations, therefore, we can use the problem cause solution method in order to structure our information. Then we have the last method, the IDA method, once again an acronym. Attention, interest, desire, and action. This is best suited when you are trying to make a persuasive presentation. Imagine an advertisement that is the best kind of persuasive presentation, or a sales pitch. So now you're trying to focus on making somebody take an action that is favorable to yourself. How do you make an advertisement act in your own favor? First of all, you arouse the attention of the viewer. You need to grab their attention. That is why ads are so creative all the time. You need to grab your viewers or your listeners' attention. Then you need to give further information so as to develop their interest in this product that you're trying to sell. Once you have sufficiently aroused their interest in the product, you can gradually give them suggestions that make them desire the product actively. If and only if they desire the product, will they take an action so as to buy the product or invest in the product. Let's say you're developing an application, but you need a couple of investors. First of all, you grab their attention. Then you tell them why this application is of interest to them. Then you actively build their desire in the application, saying such and such will be the advantage to your corporation if you decide to invest in this application. And the final result of this presentation, the ideal result of this presentation, is where you are able to prompt them to take an action that is favorable to you. Remember, the AIDA method or the attention, interest, desire, action method is best suited for a persuasive presentation. You want to persuade somebody to take an action which will be advantageous both to yourself and to them. Is that clear to everybody?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, so far we had been talking about the message or the story part of a presentation. The message or the story is, like we discussed in the beginning, the first crucial element of a presentation. The next crucial element of a presentation is the slides or the visual element. Our focus here will be on designing impactful slides without essentially being a great designer. So you are simply trying to craft a slide deck, a very useful slide deck which can serve the purpose of a business presentation or of a classroom presentation without being a great designer ourselves, right? Without being great designers ourselves, I should say. Now, this is not to undermine the talent of somebody here who might actually be a great designer. Feel free to use all of your talents. Rather, this is just to reassure those of you who might not be great designers. Okay? Right. So, in a slide deck, there are some things that are necessary, some things that are optional. A cover slide or the title slide, that is necessary. An overview slide that quickly discusses the main points that you're going to cover in this presentation, that is necessary. Every presentation will have some objectives that the presentation is trying to meet. These objectives will also be listed under the overview slide. Then there are text slides and visual slides, charts and graphs, and section header slides. These are all slides that you can use as required. There is no insistence on any of these slides. You should be able to judge whether a section header slide is necessary in your presentation and add one accordingly. You should be able to decide where a chart or a graph is required and thus incorporate a chart or a graph into your slides. Give me a second. I just need to have a quick drink of water. I'll rejoin you in a couple of seconds. Right. In some cases, we also add images to our slides. Where is an image necessary? Is the question that we should be asking ourselves when we are trying to decide how many visual slides we should add into our presentation. So we don't just strew our presentation with images all over. That's very unprofessional. That's not what we want in a business presentation or in a classroom presentation. But you can use images sparingly and where they are required. Text slides. Nobody can tell you that this is the number of text slides that you should use in your presentation. There might be a rough number of slides which you can use in a presentation in total, but it's up to you to decide how many of those slides should be text slides. Regardless of how many text slides there are, you should use a legible font. What is legible? Legible is readable. Readability should be prioritized when you're using a text slide. With minimal text, you shouldn't have whole chunks of text or whole paragraphs of text in your text slide. A summary slide is necessary. You restate the things that you've discussed so far, recapitulate your key message, and then also incorporate any call for action. Remember IDA method where the final step was a call for action. You incorporate that call for action into your summary slide. And the thank you slide indicates that you have come to the end of your presentation. Therefore, it is also a necessary slide. You can consult several sources in order to get a slide template. Just clarifying, are my slides visible to you? Can you see what is on the screen?
Yes.
See it entirely.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Right.
Ma'am.
So you can use any of these sources. Prezi, SlidesGo, Google Slides, Slides Carnival. All of these are just some of endless options available to you. Or you can simply opt for PowerPoint. It does not matter what template you choose. What matters is how you use that template. When you're using an image, make sure that you're not using copyrighted images. If you are using copyrighted images or images taken from some other published work, make sure to cite those images. Citation is where you give the source of this image. This is not just for images, by the way. If you're using some kind of data, you're presenting some kind of census data, for example, you cite that data. Where did you take this data from? If you fail to cite your data, it counts as plagiarism. Okay? So citation is a part of academic honesty. You can get this PDF from the supplementary contents tab in your dashboard, I believe. We'll address such logistical questions towards the end of the presentation. So for now, let's just focus on the presentation. Every discipline will have its own citation methods. For example, I come from a literature background. We use a certain citation style called MLA, Modern Language Association. This is not used in any specific part of the country only. This is used worldwide. So this is very consistent and very uniform. You should be acquainted with the style of citation that is most commonly used in your discipline. And then you should be able to use that style of citation consistently, uniformly in any academic write-ups and presentations. Okay, this is a necessary part of learning to build your presentation without any plagiarism in it. You can use graphics, you can use smart art, but sparingly. It shouldn't look like your presentation or the text in your presentation has been put in unprofessionally. You should therefore choose a font combination. This font combination should be used consistently across all slides. A font combination is simply your decision about what font are you going to use for your titles, what font are you going to use for the subsidiary points. Let's say you're using Times New Roman for your subsidiary points. You can use, let's say, Calibri for your titles. These are just very common fonts that I'm using here as examples. I'm not saying this is what you should be using. You can use fonts of your preference, but make sure that you're using the same font combination across slides. So from slide all through my slides, I'll be using Calibri for my titles and Times New Roman for my subsidiary points. When you're making a font combination, feel free to use sans serif fonts as well as serif fonts. Sans serif fonts are those fonts which do not have that little decorative tail. Serif fonts are those fonts with that little decorative tail. We'll talk further about this as we go further ahead in our presentation. But try not to use fonts that look too informal. Comic Sans, for instance. These fonts might not be the best fit in a professional presentation or in a classroom presentation. So try not to use fonts that appear too informal. The same goes for colors. You can choose a color combination of, let's say, 3 or 4 colors. You use that color combination consistently across all slides. When you use a color combination, you should prioritize the readability of your text. Can my text be read clearly if I am using this against a dark colored background? Should I therefore use a light colored background? These are the kind of decisions that we need to make when we are making our color combination. Formatting should be consistent across your slides, and there should not be grammatical errors, punctuation errors, alignment inconsistencies in your slides. So you need to spend a little bit of time after you've made your presentation, just to clean up your text. Ensure that your alignment is correct. Ensure that your punctuation and grammar are correct. Okay? What you see on the left is an example of a serif font. It has this little decorative foot over here. What you see on the right is an example of a sans serif font. It does not have that little decorative foot over here. Okay, that is the only difference. You can use a combination of serif fonts and sans serif fonts in your slides. You do not have to stick to any one. That is the only point that I would like to emphasize here. Serif fonts are typically intended for long sequences of words. Because they have that little decorative foot, it serves the purpose of guiding your eye through long lines of text. So if you have long sentences or a rather long bulleted point, then a serif font would be ideal in that case. This does not mean that you are forbidden from using serif fonts for titles. This just means that in a context where you'll need to have a long line of text, it is preferable to use a serif font because it makes reading easier. That's all. A sans serif font, sans really literally just means without in French. In English, we don't really use the French pronunciation of song. We just say sans, right? Sans serif font is that without that little decorative foot. Sans serif fonts are considered to be ideal fonts to be used in, let's say, children's books because they're very simple and plain. They're also considered to be best suited for titles, subtitles, and generally text to which you want to draw someone's quick attention. So let's say you have text inside of a box. You can use a sans serif font there, while you would use a serif font for all other bulleted information. Okay? Georgia, Times New Roman, and Courier are examples of serif fonts. Arial, Tahoma, and Century Gothic are examples of sans serif fonts. Okay? Now, have a quick look at the tables that are given here. Which would you say is better formatted and why? Tell me why you think whichever your choice is a better formatted table.
Right side, ma'am.
Right side is better formatted. Why do you say so? Can you tell me why?
Because, ma'am, it's
There is not any borderline and
One by one, I think Anzar had begun speaking first. Please go
ma'am,
on, Anzar.
because font color and details information available.
Font, color, and details. So I would just say maybe it's more right to say that certain information has been highlighted. Right. Who else was trying to say earlier? Please speak now.
Easier to follow roads.
Easier to follow. Easier to follow. Yes. Pratik, what were you saying?
yes, ma'am. I was also saying that only that because of many columns and rows, it's the left one seems not good.
Okay, left one seems not good. So what amongst all the things that you said right now, one common thing that you can see is that you find the column on the right easier to read, which means when you format your tables in a certain manner, prioritizing readability, your viewers or your audience will immediately like that template better than just a raw data, all the table, no highlighting of information kind of table, right? So you're just trying to make information accessible and readable. There is no difference in the kind of information that is stated here and the kind of information that is stated here. The only difference is that this table tries to make that information more accessible. This is also arranged in a certain order. So they have immediately drawn your attention to the kind of to the data that they want you to notice. All of this can be achieved visually. That is the only point that I'm trying to state here. I don't need to rely wholly on my oral presentation in order to draw your attention to these two figures. I can simply highlight them like this, put them in a box. I don't have to read out these headers to you. I can simply highlight those headers. You will be able to make out what those headers are immediately without my further verbal assistance. Okay? So whenever you are presenting information, and you will need to present information, prioritize readability and accessibility. It's not about what you are trying to present. It's not about whether these figures and these figures are the same. Rather, it's simply about which of these tables your viewer finds it easier to read. So you have to be very empathetic towards whoever you are presenting your content to. You can't think just about what is convenient for you. This is something that you should keep in your mind. This is also very useful in terms of, like, at this stage you would probably be making more of classroom presentations. A certain template works well in a classroom presentation. Later on, when you get a job, you'll go on to make business presentations, in which case you will have to be even more brief, right? So nobody will be willing to humor you if you are trying to make a long presentation. So you should keep your audience in mind when you are structuring your slides. There is something called death by PowerPoint. What is this death by PowerPoint? Death by PowerPoint happens when you rely too much on your slides. Relying on your slides is not in itself a bad thing. I wouldn't say so. That's why you have slides, so that you can smoothly go from one heading to another, from one point to another. However, if you reach a stage where you simply cannot proceed with your presentation unless you have your slides in front of you, that will lead to death by PowerPoint. If you dump too much of data or text on your slides, your PowerPoint will no longer be your ally or your friend. Your PowerPoint will work against you. There will be no synchronization between the content that you're trying to present orally and the content that you've projected on screen. Synchronization happens when your audience is able to relate your verbal account with your visual account. However, in certain cases, if you are just dumping too much of information onto your slides, then your audience will not be able to Draw this relation, draw this connection very effectively. When that happens, once again, you will face death by PowerPoint. Lastly, if you fail to customize your slides and your speech based on your audience's profile, you will once again find it difficult to go ahead with your PowerPoint presentation. Like I said, an investor will not be receptive to the same kind of stories or the same kind of oral verbal content as a fellow student would be receptive to. You need to keep that difference in mind. If you look at the way I am presenting now, for instance, this is most certainly not a presentation that I would make in front of a prospective investor. This is 100% a student oriented presentation. I am repeating myself. I'm trying to go slow. I'm asking multiple times if I've been successful in communicating the ideas that I wanted to communicate. All of these are things that a presenter does, keeping the audience's profile in mind. So you customize your slides and your speech based on your audience's profile. Now remember, this is something that is very important. You've made your slides. You feel well prepared. You've also made your draft for your verbal presentation, I mean. Again, you feel well prepared. But at some point, while you're presenting, if you need to make some kind of an alteration, where would you make this alteration? Would you make this alteration in your slide, or would you make this alteration in your verbal speech?
In a speech.
Preferably
In
the
speech. In the speech, yes, very good. Now you understand what I'm trying to tell you. You would make this alteration in your speech. So, whenever you're trying to make a presentation, keep in mind that your speech or your verbal content is supposed to be the more customizable part of your presentation. This is where you make ad hoc changes. This is where you add more content, add more explanation. This is where you can go slow. This is where you can go fast if required. Okay? None of this is possible with slides. Slides once made are slides made forever, right? Made forever in the sense of made for the D-Day, not in the sense of you can never edit those slides, but in the sense of you might not have enough time to edit your slides before you head into your presentation. So keep your verbal content plastic. This is what I'm trying to tell you. Be open to changes in your verbal presentation. This is what makes you adaptable, right? If you are adaptable in terms of presentations, you will be able to deal with any kind of crisis. If you're not adaptable in terms of your presentation, the slightest bit of, let's say, a technical hiccup happens. You will feel like you've been stumped. You won't be able to go ahead with your presentation. So remember to keep the verbal part of your presentation open to changes, adaptable, right? Okay, so any questions based on what we've covered so far? Any questions? Anything that you require clarifications on? Ayush, yes, please go.
How to check that the image is copyrighted or not, or where to check?
So the idea is if you're taking your image from an already published work, you have to cite that source. When I say already published work, it can also be published on the internet, from a blog, let's say, from another website. None of these are images that are freely available to you. Images that are freely available to you are those images that are there in Creative Commons. If you go to Creative Commons and get your image from Creative Commons, you can rest assured that your image does not have to be cited. Okay? However, if you're taking your image from any other source, cite that source. Is that clear?
Yes, ma'am. But the
Okay, just a
creative
second. Just a second. I'm sorry. Please go on. Aish, you were saying?
I'm saying that where to check means let's say I have to do a LinkedIn post and I have selected a photo from from Google and now
Huh?
I'm thinking that it is copyrighted or not. So where to check means
So
Creative Commons is a website or what?
you can access Creative Commons on the internet. That's not the issue. What I'm saying is, if you have not taken your image from the Creative Commons, then assume that it has to be cited. That is the safest practice in terms of citation. Okay? That is all I'm trying to say. And even when you say you've taken your image from Google, what do you mean by that? It must be there in a specific site, right? You're just accessing it through the browser. So
Yes,
it actually belongs to a site or a blog or some place, right? So you cite that as your source. It doesn't really matter to you where the author of that blog or the custodian of that website has found that image from. You don't have to seek out the primary source of the image, but if you're encountering the image from some place in the vast web, then make sure to cite that place in your presentation. That's what I'm trying to say. Answer
okay,
your question. Answer?
Ma'am, I guess IOC is saying like if any person created presentation, so how can recognize this is image is copyrighted or not? He is saying.
So this is technically not an issue that surfaces when we are making small classroom presentations. However, when you are presenting for higher stakes, let's say you have an external examiner, for instance, sometimes our university examiners can also be quite strict in terms of citations and referencing, right? Then, unless you've cited the source of the image, you are likely to get in trouble. Likely to get in trouble as in your grades are likely to be deducted because you've not cited the source of the image. Like I said, if you are adding an image to your presentation without citing its source, it counts as plagiarism. Plagiarism is stealing. Stealing is not something that goes in the spirit of academic honesty. So citation is just something that we do in order to uphold the spirit of academic honesty. This can be even more problematic if you are taking data from specific places. If you're taking data from anywhere, a table of data, anywhere, you have to cite the source of that data. Any examiner who is also going through your presentation will be very strict about this. Is that clear? And an investor, if you're presenting in front of an investor, what happens is you've not cited the source, let's say, of some data that you're using. It will immediately undermine the credibility of your presentation. You will immediately turn into somebody who's using data in his or her presentation but does not even know where that data has come from. How do you know this data is reliable? Will be the next question. So you are trying to just anticipate those questions and address them beforehand by referring to, by adopting healthy citation practices. Now, I'm not sure about what style of citation is commonly used by data science students. You will have to clarify that with your instructors and then make sure to use that style uniformly. Right, I just need to make a couple of logistical clarifications. Recordings are being made. Recordings will be made available to you in the YouTube playlist, not right now, but after the workshop sessions have concluded. Okay? This YouTube playlist link should be available to you in your course calendar. It's also there in the discourse forum. And the PDFs of the PPT that I'm using right now should be available under the supplementary materials and supplementary contents. I'm not sure what it's called, tab in your dashboard. Is that clear?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you everybody for attending today's session. We will call it a day now. I hope you'll join me again for the rest of the session tomorrow. And I hope that this was useful for you. Above all, I hope that someday when you're making your own presentations, the things that you've heard here would be of use to you. Thank you and have a good evening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, everybody.